Beside the Brook, the story of someone who found the truth, written by McDonald. Beside the Brook, Chapter 12, Fire in the Wood. The afternoon was hazy and hot, and in the stillness of the woods the only sounds were the crackling of opening cones and the soft cooing of pigeons. The silence of summer had come to the other birds, for the raising of 2 or 3 broods had made them forget their spring songs, and the younger birds could not yet sing. Another wryneck twisted its snaky neck from the hole in the tree where Peggy and John had seen the first. Mr. Jupe contemplated moving his pheasants any night now to the freedom of the woods, for July had come, and the young charges were long-legged and plump with stiff quills well grown. Tall green bracken now fringed the tracks in the big cover, and except for purple clumps of heather, the woods were too shaded to permit the growth of any flower except the hardiest weeds. As the day wore on, the shafts of sunlight streaming between the trees grew grey with an unnatural haze, and a smell of smoke drifted through the wood. It was not the mild and pleasant fragrance of a woodman's fire, but an odour that grew stronger minute by minute. The workers in the timber yard, getting ready to close the sawmill for the day, became aware of the signs. "There is a forest somewhere," said the foreman. "The smoke is coming from the big cover," exclaimed Bob Tyler, running for his bicycle. "There would be a fire just on knocking off time," groused old Harry Pitt. "Suppose we'll be expected to go and put 'un out." "'Tis the least we can do," reproved the foreman. "It'll spread like fury in this dry weather, and there's no saying where it'll stop." He led the way to the woods, from the densest part of which a cloud of smoke billowed into the pale sky, and before that had dispersed, another ashen blue rolled swiftly up against it. "It's got a good hold!" shouted Bob, as he raced along the soil track through the woods. "'Twere lucky for me I never shifted me birds," observed Mr. Jupe, standing hands on hips to gaze at the smoke column. "'Tis getting thick. Hope they'll stop afore it gets here." He had seen many fires, so he did not take this one too badly. Once or twice his own cottage buried in the woods had been threatened. The centre of this fire was a good distance from that, so he resumed his work of feeding grain to his charges. Kenneth, on his way home from work, saw the fire and went a mile or so out of his way to lend what aid he could. It was a simple matter for him to locate the fire, for apart from the cries of men there arose a thick and rapid crackling as of the splitting of brittle sticks, and on the air, choked with suffocating brown smoke, floated flakes of wood ash and sparks. Throwing his bicycle into a bush, he ran along a tunnel in the undergrowth that opened on to a terrifying scene. An acre of peat and heather was asmoke, and from it tongues of flame licked up the boles of tall Scots firs, as if reaching to pull their stately tops to destruction. Bushes disappeared in a moment of fierce crackling. Neat stacks of fir props, the result of hours of work by the foresters, were attacked and consumed in fiery ferocity, the resinous sap feeding the hungry flames. Fire leapt from bole to bole, sweeping towards the fresh green of silver birches, which shrivelled as if recoiling from the blaze. Clumps of sphagnum moss, grown to the size of armchair cushions in the boggy soil of winter, now afforded dry fuel for the flames racing along the ground. Men homebound to the villages near had rallied to the combat. Though hungry and tired after the day's work, they fell to beating the ground with branches hastily cut from the birches. They did not attempt to extinguish the flames attacking wood piles and trees. That would have been a fruitless task. But they beat the smoking ground wherever a red glow blossomed into a fountain of sparks, to prevent the fire from travelling along to the dense part of the woods. Foresters hewed clearings to check the course of the flames, as if possessed of their morning strength. "Fire engine'll soon be here," called the timber yard foreman. "Hey, Bob's on the high road to show them the quickest way." Kenneth had cut a switch from a tree, and standing in line with 3 others was beating the ground furiously. This was no time to put his thought into words, for he wanted all his strength and breath, but he noticed the adders and grass snakes sliding between the heather clumps to the shadow of the dark woods, and the beetles and spiders tumbling in haste to get away. Suddenly he heard a guttural scow-wowing behind him, and caught sight of a frenzied red squirrel, legs outspread and sensitive tail a-quiver. All ways she looked, now springing to the right, now to the left, now facing the blaze, now retreating from it. Fear of the racing red destruction had caused her wits to forsake her. It was greater than the fear of men, to whom she now fled in her extremity. But no one had time for squirrels. The wild things must look after themselves. 2 engines had arrived, and the hoses wound like black serpents through the woods to the Trout Brook and its tributaries. Though the waters were at a low level, the pools were always deep, and soon the steady throb of the engines added their reassurance to the uncertain striving of men. A face wearing blue spectacles appeared at the tunnel, proclaiming the owner to be Mr. Sprackling, diverted from his journey home by desire to see the excitement. He did not offer to help, for he was a bit lame in one leg. An old man might provide more trouble than help in this fight by the nimble of limb. Besides, Snowball's rein was hitched to a tree, and he did not guarantee what might happen if Queenie's eagerness to get home were thwarted. Limping towards the beaters, he accosted them. "That be hotter nor hell, bain't it?" he remarked sympathetically. The men were too engrossed to reply, and scarcely noticed him, though Kenneth marked the observation. "I'll tell you later," he replied, without stopping his exertions, and Mr. Sprackling departed. Some wives, guessing the reason for the non-arrival of their menfolk, had come with tea in baskets, and watched from a safe distance, waiting until the fire came under sufficient control for the firefighters to pause. The steady sprays from the roses seemed to quench the fire at last. Like an orange between the treetops, the sun cast bars of brown light through the smoke cloud upon tree trunks shining and black, and upon masses of charcoal. The woodland was now only smoking sullenly, and the men could ease off to recover strength, their faces black, their bodies sweating. Now and again a fighter ran to beat out a flame that surged up from the smouldering peat to lick round a heather clump. "Reckon some of us could go home now," said Bob. "Aye, it's been a long day," said another. The head forester was now arranging a system of night watches, for the fire would smother for the day or 2. "I'll look in on Teddy for a cup of tea and a wash," thought Kenneth, not relishing the prospect of an hour's cycle ride before reaching home. Teddy gave him the usual welcome. "So you've been helping to fight the fire," he said. "I watched the smoke and guessed there was a considerable blaze. Did it do much damage?" A fair amount, replied Kenneth, but it would have been disastrous had it reached the thickets of the big cover. Mr. Sprackling looked in, and, remembering the mark, he added, I must do a bit of explaining to him sometime. Why? Asked Teddy, coaxing the flames below the kettle. He spoke of the fire being as hot as hell. What a lot of confusion and superstition hangs over the minds of people with regard to matters of heaven and hell. I believe even those who fear God at all think this earth is going to be destroyed by fire in the end, all due to faulty interpretation of the Scriptures, agreed Teddy. Yes, the word pictures of the book of Revelation and the fires of the rubbish pit outside Jerusalem, and the parable of the rich man and Lazarus are all mixed up to support the idea. People do not distinguish between the real and the pictorial meaning. I could not do that myself, admitted the shepherd, without help. I did not understand how the world was to be cleansed at the coming of the Lord. Yes, the day will come that will burn as an oven, said Kenneth. I couldn't help thinking as I saw the snakes wriggling from the fire of those words of John the Baptist when he attacked the Pharisees. O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Now also the axe is laid to the root of the tree. Therefore every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. No, snakes don't like fire, said Teddy. Didn't one escape from the fire and fasten on Paul's hand after the shipwreck? Right, replied Kenneth. And though a poisonous type, it did the apostle no harm. The power of wickedness cannot hurt the chosen of God in the day of his vengeance.